I wanted to share with you the project that I've been working on for the last like 4 years or so. And it has to do with ancient graffiti or rock art. And it's called the Ibex Code. It's supposed to be a documentary movie, not fully funded yet, so we're still working on it, but the research is there, and wanted to show you some of it. Why do I call it the Ibex Code? Well, first we see all this graffiti, and we don't really know what it means. And the purpose of this research was to try and understand what the meaning is of these weird symbols. And why the ibex, I can show you now. There's no movie yet, but I made a short teaser that show an overall what is the movie about and why the ibex was chosen. Now, evolution of symbolism is a pretty big subject, and I had to choose one symbol to represent this evolution that I'm talking about. And I'll show you why I'm choosing this symbol as the ibex.
If until now human history was covering the last 5,000 years, by studying rock art, we may have a human history covering the last 50,000 years.
Two basic questions always come up. How old is it? And what does it mean?
A lot of the rock art is ceremonial and ritual. There's a kind of mystery to it, combined with a kind of beauty. You know, pecking these images on these rocks, sometimes in extremely remote places.
I've come to see that there are far more complex things going on in the rock art. It's not just anyone did it. They're special places, and as if they're saying something very important.
Here you see all these stones tell a story. They are messages. They say something.
When the first time you come to a place like this, it's like entering into a huge library.
The rock art contains a lot of religious, symbolic, cultic content. Ibexes are the most common items in rock art, not only in the Negev, but also in Sinai, in southern Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, in Mongolia.
The ibex here is the most numerous image type throughout all periods.
Even California. So there is a story here.
Bighorn sheep were a venerated animal.
You see it all over the Great Basin, all over the Desert West.
در میان سنگ‌نگارهای ایران بیشترین نقش تکراری نقش‌های بز کوهی یا آیبکس هستند.
In this area of the Western Himalayas, the ibex tends to dominate.
It blows your mind that there should be such a commonality.
It is not impossible that the meaning is the same everywhere.
So what does it mean?
Now, what does it mean? Who knows? There are just so many questions about these things. We're trying to look through a very dark window along a long corridor to a deep past. But that past is us. We are trying to learn something about ourselves. A lot of this we're never going to know.
What we want to do now is to understand, to read, to decipher the meaning of rock art.
To decipher the culture.
We see clues.
I don't have any facts, but I have clues. Looking for patterns.
Looking at many different panels and seeing parallels between one panel and another in different places.
There are some things in common to most of the ibexes.
It's clear that it's not random.
If we approach it from a whole lot of angles, then we might have some hope.
Everything is connected to everything. Eventually, I was able to decipher all these motifs.
Okay, well, thank you. So this is just a teaser. Again, there's no movie yet, obviously, until we get funded for that. But this pretty much explains why the ibex, because everywhere we see this kind of rock art, we see a lot of geometrical symbols and signs and animals, but when we see animals, 80% of the animals would be either the ibex in Asia, or here in America, it would be the bighorn sheep. And it seems like people had some sort of obsession with this animal on the rock, and The question is, what does it mean? Can we understand? Can we know what it means? Or is it just something they drew like that and we'll never know what it is? So this is the ibex. The ibex is a mountain goat. It has large horns and a little goatee beard. So it's a wild mountain goat, basically. And this is the bighorn sheep. It's a different animal. It's a sheep as opposed to a goat. A completely different animal. They have different number of chromosomes, but culturally they're considered the same thing. Wherever there's ibex and sheep, they would be the most prominent animal. If there's no ibex around, like in North America, they would use the sheep. But they're compatible as far as their symbolism, as far as their horns. This guy doesn't have a beard. But other than that, it has impressive horns, and they have very common behaviors. This is the ibex. It lives in desert or high mountains. They are mating in the fall, and in the mating seasons, the males fight each other like that. And this is the bighorn sheep. They do exactly the same thing. They're mating in the fall, same way, and the males fight for dominance, and normally the biggest horns win. Normally the females like the male with the biggest horns. So they're pretty much using the same symbolism, and we can see even in America. This is from 1910 from the Owens Valley. It's an Indian basket. They confused the bighorn sheep with an ibex. They call it an ibex. So there's always a confusion. I think only in the last like 30 years people stopped calling the bighorn sheep ibex because they're so similar. So just one more word about these animals. The ibex or the bighorn sheep would be prominent in all the nomadic cultures, while in the fertile lands, the bull will be the dominant animals. And that's where fertile lands, meaning like the valleys, and throughout history, that's mainly where civilization started. So civilized people would be more into the bull. You can see that like in Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Hindu Valley, Rome. But it'll have the same attributes as the ibex for the nomads. And the same goes for people up north. In the forest, they would be more interested in the deer, although the ibex does exist there, but they have different problems. We'll see later on why the ibex is important, and then you can understand why for the northern people it wasn't that important. They were more interested in other things that the deer represented for them. So rock art goes, as far as we know, in the caves for about 40,000 years ago. Now these are called pictographs. They're painted using pigment, and they're only painted in caves, and they were done during the Ice Age. And people stopped producing them about 10,000 years ago. When the Ice Age was over, they stopped producing those cave art. We still see them in Europe, though. And what we can see in those caves, that there are many animals. And if you look at the animals, they're mostly horned animals. Some lions, some horses. But mostly, we can see horses here, but mostly the bison or the bull was the most important one. And then we can see some deer and ibex and all these animals. And they've been researching these caves for a while now, trying to figure out what is this about. Why would they paint all these animals? There's a researcher, Canadian researcher, her name is Genevieve von Petzinger, and she's joining the movie now, actually. And she was investigating those European caves, and she found that besides animals, they have all these kinds of signs next to the animals, and these signs are a finite number of signs, actually. All over Europe, they use a finite number of signs. So again, it's not arbitrary. It seems like some sort of a sign language, and it seems like those paintings must have had some meaning, which is very difficult to know when it's 40,000 years ago. This is a petroglyph. It's different than a pictograph because it's not using any pigment or paint. It's just specked in the rock. And the way it works, it's specked in the rock and exposing the white inside of the rock, while the outside of the rock is a dark patina. Now, why is it 10,000 years? We don't know if they did it before or not, because it takes about 1,000 years, about 10,000 years, for the carving to gain a patina that looks like the surface of the rock again, and then it disappears over time. It lasts about 10,000 years, although there are some petroglyphs that are dated to about 14,000 years ago, but not more than that. So we don't know if they made it before that, when they were doing the cave paintings or not. But in any case, for the last 10,000 years, since they stopped with the caves, we see those petroglyphs all over the world. And we can talk about 10,000 years of this history, because normally with nomads in general, things don't change for a long time, unless they have to. And that would happen if there's like extreme weather or climate change, or new people show up, invasions or anything like that, migration, or new technology shows up as well. Then there's a change, but until that change comes, these people could go on thousands of years maintaining the same culture with no changes. It's not like a new iPhone comes out every half a year or so. These are the places that I visited for this research. Essentially, this is Israel, Iran, which I couldn't go. I sent a crew to shoot there. Here in the Himalayas, in Tajikistan, the Pamir mountains in the Silk Road, and Mongolia here, and California here. So these are representative places, although I took a lot of other material from other places, and I must say that the internet and Facebook were very helpful, because most of this material is not something that was researched for a long time. There are some guys who have some sites by their village in Turkey or whatever. They go take pictures of it, and then I can get information about these remote places. But otherwise, there are no books or anything like that for the remote places. Okay, so what does it mean? This is the approach, the general approach people take for deciphering the meaning of these things. And first of all, we have to understand the context. Where it is, how old it is, which is not easy. They're developing now some techniques to measure the date of the petroglyphs by the patina, the age of the patina, but this is in development as well. And who made it, the most important. We can check like the archaeology around historical references or living cultures, but normally it's very difficult to know who these people were, because they contributed a lot to civilization, but they mainly remain outside of history, outside of the history books. So we don't know who they were. Sometimes they are mentioned by the civilized world, but most of the times we just don't know who these people were. And we have a very vague background, and we have to study the morphology of the images to understand, or try to understand, what they really mean. It can have a few meanings. First, it can have no meaning at all. And in fact, some recent ones are just pegged by bored shepherds. So they're going there with their herd, they have nothing to do, they pick something on the rock. This happened in recent years, but we know that was not the case throughout most of the period they were pecking that, because the environments where they're pecked are normally sacred places, sacred grounds. So we know they were used for some cultic purposes. What is the cultic purpose, though? The main thought since the beginning of the century was that it is hunting magic, because we see a lot of hunting scenes. So the thought, and this is according to some anthropology in Africa, I believe, where they're still hunter-gatherers. So they thought, okay, they want to succeed in the hunt. They would draw the animal on the rock and then perform some ceremony to hunt it, and if this is successful, they will be successful tomorrow morning hunting the actual animal. There are a few problems with that. Main problem is that in most places where they checked these hunting scenes, petroglyphs, they saw that the archaeology doesn't show that this animal was in their menu at all. Very little. But they were eating other animals like gazelles and boars and many other animals. And those animals are not pecked on the rocks. So this is not just hunting magic, it's not just a menu item, it's more than food. There must be other meaning associated with this kind of images. The other option that became pretty popular here in America since the 70s is that these were used by Indian shamans, and the shamans were taking lots of drugs and going on their vision quest. And when they come back from their vision quest, they would pack their vision on the rocks. And so basically, these are all shamanistic images. Some of it makes sense, but some of it is a little problematic as well, because what we see on the rocks are repetitive images. So if this is just a vision of somebody really high, they wouldn't just keep any convention. They would do some whatever. But here we see they keep convention. So it's more than that. They were actually conscious to what they're doing, and other people were able to understand what they're doing. That means that at least among their community, there's some sort of sign language that they all could understand. And it's probably some sort of an icon that means something to somebody. Now we see a lot of these that are compositions. We see one ibex here fighting a dog, and here's a new one with the dog behind him with the inscription here. This inscription is from about 2,000 years ago, and just the name of a person. So it's a dedication. So a person writes like, "I was here," and out of all the images in the world, he's choosing these images to be next to his name for some reason. Ibex and a dog. There's another older ibex here, and here's an archer, if you can see. But there's something else really interesting here, if you can see. 2 footprints. Now, when there are footprints, it's normally an indication to a sacred ground. So that means there's something that could be sacred here because of these footprints. Here's another ibex here, chased by a dog, but you can see how many footprints are around it, and from many periods. This is pretty old. This is probably the new one. But we can definitely see that the ibex is associated with a sacred place in this way. This is a 2nd millennium BC temple in Syria for a goddess. There's a raw lions here, and this is the inside of the temple, but you can see here in the entrance, see the footsteps indicating a sacred place. So we kind of know that the ibex is connected with some ceremonies, cult, sacred grounds. This is from the Himalayas, for example. You can see these are stupas. Stupas are Buddhist shrines, and they peg these Buddhist shrines over the ibex. That means that the new iconography of relics or holy objects are drawn over what was sacred before. So they realized the ibex was sacred, but now the new religion took over. So that's where Buddhism replacing it. Now we can see other elements surrounding the ibex. For example, there's this guy here. And this guy is basically worshipping the ibex. This gesture, like that, hands up, and this is international, means adoration or prayer or something like that. And also, obviously, there's some fertility aspect to this. So we can see there's adoration and fertility aspect to the ibex. This is from Israel. This is from the Himalayas. You see again a person, hands up, fertility, and this is a sheep, and here's an ibex, if you can see. This is in the Pamir Mountains in Tajikistan, in the Silk Road. You can see a person with the hands up here. Again, this is in the Himalayas. You see a person, fertility aspects, um, adorning the ibex. So we already know it's not just an image. It was something that's more than that. It has to do with cult. It was venerated, and it has to do with fertility. Here's another name, Safayitic as well. So the fact that there's a name, a guy just passed by, right? So he carved his name and put an ibex here. Why would he do that? You know, so why? People do that all the time. They go somewhere and write their names, but then when they write their names, they put something. If they put a symbol, it would be something that can identify themselves. It might be their football team logo, or it might be a cross. A lot of people do a cross. So it might be something like that, some sort of a social identity that this person has, because a lot of people just write their names and put an ibex. What's up with that? And something else to know, that this ibex has a dot here. And a dot here maybe, but certainly a dot here. Here's another one. This is in Nabatean. And this is not just a name, but a blessing. It's a give peace to so-and-so. So when they were doing that also, they put an ibex. There's another person worshipping an ibex. He's got some tools in his hands. Could be like a spear and a shield or something. But we also see here a crescent on top. So there's something with the ibex and crescent symbolism. Here's another one. A few crescents and horn symbols that reminds us a little bit also of like maybe zodiac symbols. But certainly it's associated with crescents, and it could be celestial objects. Here's another example, the moon under this, and this is clearly celestial objects because of the moon, and the swastika, which in that area was a symbol of the sun. Here we can see ibexes with horns that are exaggerated. They're half a circle, like a full moon. Totally unnatural, and we see a dot inside. Again, dots inside the horns, exaggerated horns. And again, this is from Tajikistan. We can see the hunter and the dot in the middle of the horns. So it must mean something if it repeats itself over and over again. This is from Iran. Again, you can see the dot and hunting scene, ibex and the dot. Another one from Iran, and here you see the dot is above the horns, but still there's something going on with these dots. And again, nothing is random. People spend time making this, so nobody will spend 2 hours just making random things. They have to have intention in doing these.
Are we sure it's the same artist that did it?
No. Sometimes you can see actually that the dot is not the same artist. That somebody added a dot to the ibex. Yeah, so it could be something that came later on. Actually here, definitely this is newer, the dot. From this, it's brighter. It's not the same artist. It's probably the artist who made these, whatever that is. He added a dot and added legs here to the forelegs of the ibex. Here's an example of a bull. It has a dot above the horns. Again, if it's a bull, it might be a yak, because the yak sometimes has a circle at the end of the tail. But you can see the dot above the horns here. Now this is Isis, the Egyptian god Isis, and it's exactly the same thing that's going on. Isis is carrying the moon or the sun between the horns, and this is her animal figure. As we mentioned, like in the fertile areas, the bull was the main animal, and the same goddess here in her human form. The way you can identify her is by the horns and the circle between the horns, which is the moon or the sun she's carrying. So we can see that the ibex has some attributes that look like a deity that has to do with the sun or the moon or something like that. Here's another one from the Himalayas. There's a lot of things going on here. Another person adoring an ibex above. But if you look, there's something interesting right here. The person adoring as well, but he's standing on an ibex, which seems completely unnatural. So, regardless if it was drawn together or not, there's a person standing on an ibex here. Even if the ibex was drawn before that, somebody added a person standing on the ibex. Yeah, it's really tricky, the dating of these things. It's another guy standing on some sort of animal, but we can see he's not riding it. He's actually standing on it. And when he's standing, also notice that in his right hand he's holding some sword or stick or something. Also a weird headdress. Now, this is from Uzbekistan. That can give us a clue what this guy is, because we see it's not human. So it's some sort of a sun or a moon god or something like that that's standing on the bull. And it's not riding, again, it's standing on it. So it's some sort of a symbol. It's not realistic. And if you look at this is a Babylonian god. It's a major god at the head of the pantheon, a storm god. So he holds in his right hand, he would hold other, like a tool, like a sword or an axe or something, exactly like the other guy, and he's standing on a bull. So basically, this is how you would make a god in Babylon, and the sun above. This is the sun disk and the wing. This is how, this is the Babylonian sun symbol. So we see so far that the symbol of the ibex means fertility. It has something to do with the moon. It means provision as well, and it means rain as well. There's a book about 19th century hunting in Saudi Arabia, and there the hunter says that they're going to hunt the ibex, and if they can't catch an ibex, the rain will not come. So it was directly associated with rain ceremonies. And people used to pray to that image as an angel, basically. We see that also from ancient Persian writings. The first men and women, like our Adam and Eve, or the equivalent of that, were when they first came along on earth, God sent a female ibex to take care of them. So it's considered as a guardian angel, basically. And that could be the reason why they always put this image of an angel when they write their names, or why it's so common. Basically, it's good luck, good fortune. That's what it meant. But why was this animal picked for that? What is the reason that people were obsessed, not necessarily with an ibex, but with any horde animal? It could be that it's just what they like to eat, and they were hunting these animals, and it was the best trophy. Getting the biggest animal with the biggest horns gave you the best pride in the tribe. But it could be something else. Could be a cultural thing, and could be that we had similar cultural origin that all came from there. And there's an interesting thing about Africa, assuming we all came out of Africa. Maybe we came out of Africa. When we came out, actually, we were cultural people already. We're not smarter than the people who came out of Africa. They were as capable as us, as far as the brain and emotions. And they were not uncultural. They already had cultures. They could speak, had language, and we know that they buried their the dead. So they had some sort of culture before. So maybe there's some cultural thing that's common to all of us that's originated back in Africa. And if we look at Africa, what's going on there, one of the main themes, and these go back at least 10,000 years ago in Africa, and it's sort of almost a living culture, because there's the Sand people who until recently were still hunters-gatherers. So we could also learn from them what these mean. One of the most common petroglyphs in Africa is the rhinoceros. And until today, sometimes they rub these images for rainmaking. So they believe this animal is not only for rainmaking but also for fertility. And we know that this animal is being poached, actually mainly to sell it in China. And everybody's interested in the horns of this animal for fertility. So that tradition, I would say, of horned animal, and this is sort of a unicorn, still goes on until today with the horns of the rhino. Although the rhino is not the most common animal in Africa, the most common animal is this animal, which is the eland. The eland is the biggest antelope in Africa. And by far, it's like the ibex is most common in Asia, the eland in Africa. About 80% of all rock art is this eland. Now, this is the eland. So it's almost like a cow, and the male can get up to a ton. And obviously, if you're a hunter, that would be your best trophy. It's the biggest antelope around, although its horns are not very impressive, but they do have this shape that, like a unicorn again. I think it's the only animal that I know that has a unicorn horn. But I don't know if there's any relation to that or not. In any case, it could be just a trophy. But there's another very interesting fact about this animal in South Africa that every South African knows. And that is that this animal is the only other mammal in Africa that is pregnant for 9 months, same as human. And I think that makes it a brother, sort of. There's some brotherhood going on between people and this animal that's pregnant as our females, but we also eat it and consume it, so it goes into us. So there's a stronger relationship with this animal. And it could be that with the tradition of this animal, once people came out of Africa, it went on to other animals. Here we see the eland with a crescent again, similar symbolism. So we know there's a connection with the moon. And perhaps once they left, the symbolism of one antelope was transferred to another antelope, which is the only one that actually existed outside of Africa, is the lift. And perhaps even the shape of the horns has something to do with the moon. We don't know exactly. So this is the ibex in Asia, and the question is, did it cross to America? We see. How much time do I have left? $15? Okay, I have to do it real quick. Okay. We see the same kind of animals in America, but we don't know, is it possible that they mean the same thing, or maybe it is just the same animals that lived around, so they pick the same animals and there's no connection whatsoever. What we see here in America, we see these, and most of the examples that I'm going to show you are from the Coso here in California. Initially, they had these figures, and these are the main spirits they used to pick on the rocks. They have patterned bodies, and they're not human. They have human structure, but they're not human. A lot of time they have bird feet, and some celestial object as heads. They're not human, but they're spirits. But that's what they used to do. Here's another one, and they didn't do stick figures. And the hand gestures are kind of similar to what's going on in the rest of the world, but not exactly. What we see, for example, in the rest of the world, sometimes we see those stick figures as couples, whether they're worshippers, shamans, priests, or deities. They come in couples sometimes, and when they come in couples, the male will always be on the left side, and the female will be to his right, to his left, on the right side. That's a rule that always works. This is in Egypt. You can see the male is on the left. This is in India. Two deities. This is the royal family in England. king will be on the left, and this is a Catholic wedding. Bride will be on the left. So this is like an international order that everybody kept. Indians couldn't care less about that. There's like either one or plenty, and that's it. There's no real order, and has nothing to do with the conventions that we see in the old world. But at some point, about 4,000 years ago, the bighorn started to become prominent, and we can see it here, and it's kind of replacing these old figures. We can see it here, even you see here very old figures, and the fresher bighorn replacing them, so that becomes like the new spirit that they believe in. There's some change going on, and there's some indications that new people came in. They started a new type of sheep. If you saw here the old type where the horns are like that, like they do the ibex in the old world, now they have a new type of sheep when the horns are bifurcated like that, and the body is like what they call a boat shape or half moon shape. So it's completely new style came in. We see same stick figures, worshipping, very similar to what we see in Asia. Also with fertility indications, footprints, right, next to bighorn, geometrical shapes, circles here, here's one with the moon or sun above. Very similar iconography to what we see in the old world. And this is very unique to what's going on here in America. It's the atlatl. They used to do a lot. They didn't do it in Asia because by then, everywhere in the rest of the world, they used bow and arrows. But here, they still use the atlatls. But 2,000 years ago, the bow and arrow came to America, and they changed everything. And we can see the changes in the rock art, whether it's just new technology or could be new people came in, but definitely we see major changes from 2,000 years ago. First, we start to see hunting scenes. We didn't see hunting scenes before when they were using the atlatl, and now all of a sudden, full of hunting scenes, same as in Asia. And not only that, same characteristics, and we see they use dogs, so this is a new technology that came along with the bow and arrow. They didn't use dogs before, and I think genetically they also checked that the Indian dog is not related to the American wolf. It's actually related to the Asian dog. So it's probably some technology that came as well. And the way they do it, the same way, there's an archer and a dog attacking the prey. The prey is always alive, and it's always bigger than the other characters. This is in Arizona, same kind of thing. No dog, but an archer and an animal. The animal is much bigger than the archer. Okay, this is in Iran. Animal is not that bigger here, but it's proportionally bigger. I'm going the wrong way. Also, one more thing to know, this is from Israel. We see the archer, dog, and ibex. Here, actually, the dog is on a leash, which is interesting. But if you look at the ibexes, both in Asia and the bighorn in America, the tail is always up. Always, always, always. And if you look at the animal, the tail is always down. So what's going on with that? Apparently, the only time when these animals have their tails up is during the fall when they're in heat or mating season. So again, this is a fertility symbol, the tail up. Again, lots of fertility connotations, but tail up, and it's this. The animal is much bigger, and it's still alive. It never dies, and there's a dog there. It's all the same convention. This is in Saudi Arabia. And another example with the bull. And sometimes we see ritual hunts here. I'm going to skip that because we're really short on time. But that basically brings me to the cosmic hunt. What is the meaning really of this hunt? Is it just hunting again, or does it have more meaning? And there's a guy in England who made his he investigated mythologies around the world and tried to find out the commonality with all these mythologies. And he kind of came up with visual representations of it, but his conclusions are that there's one common storyline, and we can see the pursuer are located in or get to the sky, and the animal is alive when transformed into a constellation. So basically, it's a story about a hunt that goes in the sky and continues in the sky. It's a hunt on Earth and in the sky as well. And normally, when the hunt is in the sky, they refer to the constellations of either the Ursa or Orion or the Pleiades. We can see that in ancient Mesopotamia, the most important celestial objects were the moon, the sun, the moon, and Venus. But also, see, here's another god, the same as before, and here's the sun. There's the moon, there's Venus, and this is the Pleiades. The Pleiades were a very important constellation to them. Okay, so these are the main constellations they were dealing with. The Pleiades, which is part of Taurus today, Orion, which is Hunter, and Sirius, which is the dog star. So if you look at the characters here, we have a Taurus, Hunter, and a dog. And these are basically the same characters as we see in the rock art. So it might be related to that. And notice all these, here we have 7 dots like the Pleiades, and there's dots here and dots here. And it's full of celestial meaning and symbology. Now this is the night sky during fall. It's a bit quick. The major constellations we see, I mean, here we see a very bright star. This is the brightest star, and this is Sirius. You see here, anybody knows what this is? Orion. And here are the Pleiades. Okay, so this is the line of stars, and this is Aldebaran, which is the follower of Pleiades. Those two together are now Taurus. But basically, we see a line of stars like that, and they move from east to west. So basically, these two guys are chasing this guy, right? The hunters chasing the prey, and they're moving this way. But what's interesting in these is that they are actually the indication for the fall coming. They rise exactly at the east at the equinox. And they were looking at these always. They were looking where these constellations rise at the east at the equinox, and they know rain is coming. And that's why these were the most important constellations for these people. Now, there was a guy in the 50s, Willy Hartner. He was a German mathematician and astronomer, and he came up with the idea that once upon a time there was an Ibex constellation here, Ibex, replaced later in the civilized world by the bull and all that. And he says, the dog chasing the Ibex, is a mythology that we can understand by the way it came to the civilized world, because we know that the Ibex became the bull, and then we know that mythology is basically this. This is the bull and the lion. The dog became the lion, and this is the same mythology. And what this is, we know because it was researched for a long time. And basically, what it is Taurus and Leo. It's a fight between Taurus and Leo, the two constellations, when Taurus represents the god Dumuzi. The god Dumuzi was a god that dies by the lion and then resurrects again in the fall. So it dies in the summer and resurrects in the fall. This is the god Dumuzi with the bull horns fighting the lion. Again, in Mesopotamia or in Egypt, you could describe a deity as an animal or as a person. So this is the guy, the god that dies and resurrects. Now, the priests in Babylon could predict exactly when this god is resurrecting, because when he dies, that means he disappears from the night sky. And once he disappears from the night sky, they knew exactly how long it take it for the resurrection, for the heliacal rising, what they call, when it appears first in the east. And that period of time was exactly 40 days. So they were mourning for 40 days, and after 40 days had big celebrations, and this is the meaning of the mythical 40 days. 40 days in the desert, which is life, death, and resurrection. And we can see it in the scriptures all over the place. That magic number of 40 means a transformation of a person that goes nowhere, almost dies, and then comes back completely new with a new religion, new everything. And that's the same meaning. So now we see that the symbol of the ibex is fertility, it's the moon, it's provision, it's rain, and it's also the equinox constellation, and it's a resurrection and eternal life. This is the meaning of that. And in the Great Basin, basically, we see that it has exactly the same meanings. So this is very interesting how the symbol arrived here and maintained the same meaning. We know that here's, for example, I took a picture of three bighorn sheep and the 3 Orion. But I interviewed a few native elders who know about the connection of the bighorn and the Orion. Exactly the same thing. And so how come it is so similar? That is the thing that explains it. Although the distance is very far, you would wonder, like, how would these guys here in America would have the same symbolism as these guys? Well, they're all in the 35 degrees latitude. That means these guys here and these guys here see exactly the same sky at exactly the same time. Bless you. With a 10 hours difference or whatever, but they see exactly the same channel TV at the same time. So, and that was their TV. I mean, if you look at the sky at night, that's all you see, and it's so prominent. So basically, they were looking at the same thing, living in a similar environment, and if there was some information moving here, could be. Now, did anything left of it? I'll just make it really short. The original ceremony was like hunting, sacrifice, and prayer. The hunting disappeared at some point. There was only sacrifice and prayer. Today we're only left with prayer, commemorating sacrifice and commemorating hunt, but we only pray. We don't do anything else. But if there's anything remain of that cult, it will remain in our prayers and a few little things we still do. And again here, this is Buddha. We see how the Buddha, actually shamanism in Asia and Siberia remained for a long time until like the 13th century, and only then Buddhism came. And Buddhism came, there's a short period when they used both symbols, but then Buddhism brought completely new set of symbolism, and the ibex cult is dead, gone, discontinued, about 700 years ago. Here in the Silk Road, tradition somehow continues. We can see here it's a caravan of horses with a ibex here and a dog and ibex here. Same kind of symbolism, and this is 1938 here. So somehow they continue that, and we see here again same kind of hunt, but they're hunting with AK-47s. But exactly the same symbolism. So somehow up there in the mountains, they kind of preserve that tradition. This is instead of sacrificing ibexes, I don't remember which holiday it is, but they bake ibex as offerings. This is Iran again, just guardian angel, and they still light candles to it and commemorate it with stone, same as we do in like a chapel or something like that. They worship the icon here. Tattoo in Iran, guardian angels in the Himalayas a lot. They pile them up in crossroads. Here in this case it's yak horns, but it could be any horned animal. They would pile them up. And that's also like they do it worldwide. This is a village in Russia. All the graves are like that with the horns, and they claim to be descendants of Alexander the Great. Alexander, that's how he was portrayed as Zeus, horned Zeus. Again, Tajikistan in shrines they keep now they pile up these horns of sheep and ibex. You can see that they separate the ibex here, sheep on the right, ibex on the left. That must have some significance. Again here, and you see that there's some other symbolism, and the ibex is above the sun, and the sheep is above the moon and Venus. So they kind of differentiate the meaning of these two. In here, we know they used to pile them up by the petroglyphs. This is a reconstruction of a pile of bighorn sheep. They don't do it anymore. They don't hunt anymore. They just what they do now is they sell the tags to people. But the Native Americans barely hunt themselves. Definitely, there's no tradition behind it any longer. These are the Hopi. They had some ceremonies involving the bighorn sheep, but I don't think they do it anymore. Today, everybody's just wearing feathers. Everybody's wearing feathers as if all the Indians wore feathers, which is totally wrong. It's like imitating the Indians of the Great Plains. It has nothing to do with the California Indians. But the California Indian and the desert culture is completely disappeared. Nobody is wearing these horns anymore. Everybody knows about like bison headdresses maybe, but nobody knows about bighorn headdresses. And this culture was much bigger than the bison of Central America or the Great Plains. Anyway, this is gone, disappeared. The only ones that I could find is these guys from deep in the Grand Canyon. This is the Havasupai tribe. They still maintain their tradition, and they have dances and stories about the bighorn sheep. And part of it probably because they're very secluded. They're down in the Grand Canyon. You can't get there with the road. You have to hike like 8 miles to get there. So the few tribes that maintain some tradition of that. In Judaism, it's all over the place. The horn is a big relic in Judaism, and the ram is big in the scriptures. It can be any antelope. The domesticated ram was the most popular among Ashkenazi or European Jews, but we can see, for example, the Yemenite Jews prefer the kudu horn. So it could be any antelope as long as it's not a cow or bull. That's not allowed. So it's basically the tradition of the antelope as a sacred animal. And again, this is the Muzi, the sacrificed lamb, the god that dies and resurrects. And this is also the Lamb of God. And we can see here, although this is also the Lamb of the God, the little lamb has some horns on it. Our little Lamb of God has no horns, so the horns completely disappeared from Christianity, and actually was a representation of the old pagan god, a complete no-no, and basically became the anti-god. And since that, that was basically the end of the ibex as a godly symbol, and since then, we don't see it anymore in any positive connotation. And this is it. Very short, but thank you very much.